I'm going to speak about the political base of Saudi society and the royal family. The Saudi regime draws its authority from the country's legendary founder, Ibn Saud, who established the country on the 23rd of September 1932. Its chief source of legitimacy has always been religious, inferred upon it by the ulama, which in a conservative Muslim country is extremely important, arguably more important than democratic legitimacy in a democracy. The principal goal of the regime is to stay in power with all the privileges it has always enjoyed. The national interest, Islam, human rights, pan-Arab concerns, and all other considerations have no bearing on political decisions and policy making, which is decided exclusively by the royal family. Saudi princes hold all the most important positions. They view themselves as the property owners and all the citizens as their subjects. Their sense of ownership extends to the land and everything on it. They believe they exclusively have the right to decide the nation's history, religion, and culture. And because they control the two holy mosques, this means they also determine how Islam is interpreted for millions around the world. There is no freedom of expression or freedom of association in Saudi Arabia, and no opposition is tolerated. This is not because of Sharia law, but because of the royal family's fear that allowing freedoms will undermine their control. Some criticism of local municipality councils is tolerated, but anyone who publicly criticizes the king faces charges of heresy, which is categorized as a religious crime, although it has no basis in Islamic law. Occasionally, Western media or human rights groups can influence the Saudis to moderate their behavior. One recent example of this was the release of Prince Walid bin Talal. A few days before he was released, a Canadian businessman gave a live TV interview to BBC Newsnight, in which he testified about the ill treatment Walid had been receiving in detention. The businessman was one of the people the Saudis had flown in to confront him. They flew in former wives and business adversaries of several moguls in order to try and break them. Shortly after the BBC interview with this businessman, Prince Walid was released, but not before giving a curious video interview to Reuters. In the Reuters video, a cadaverous, bearded, twitching Prince Walid denounces the BBC report as lies and insists that he has been well treated, while walking around a suite in the Ritz, drinking from an open can of Pepsi and holding up sachets of mustard and tomato ketchup as evidence. Since Prince Walid is a health fanatic and a vegetarian who never eats condiments like mustard and ketchup, nor touches soft drinks or food left standing for more than a few minutes, it seems that he was using these props to send a signal to people who know him well that he was speaking under duress, a possibility acknowledged by Reuters in their report. His release a few hours later underlines the acute sensitivity of the regime to Western media coverage and its existential fear of losing Western political and economic support. As long as royal family members stay on the right side of MBS, they are unaccountable for their actions and enjoy total immunity before the law. They are entitled to innumerable privileges from cradle to grave and lead lives of extraordinary luxury and decadence. They help themselves to all the state has to offer, including its oil and mineral wealth. Royal family members carry special identification documents, like a diplomatic passport, that entitles them to first-class treatment everywhere they go. And they spend vast sums on themselves and on their huge retinues of hangers-on. Decision-making in Saudi Arabia is exclusively in the hands of the royal family. Contrary to claims by the Saudi lobby, the regime does not share power with the ulama, liberals, the Majlis al-Shura, other tribes, or anybody else. As in any Muslim nation, Ulama have an important social role, but they cannot debate issues of national or political importance without royal invitation, let alone take an independent position. They are appointed and sacked arbitrarily by the king and have no power besides that bestowed on them by the regime. Within the regime, there are some liberal or secular figures in influential positions, mainly in the media. Many of these liberals are close personal friends with Saudi royal family members, but they do not have a role in decision-making. There is no transparency, and the regime is deeply secretive. Economic statistics are produced from time to time, but there are no independent bodies capable of verification. We have to piece together information about Saudi Arabia and the Saudi economy using reliable external statistics. Interestingly, the recent purge has marked a change in Saudi politics. MBS turning the country from rule by family to one-man rule undermines the narrative that regime propaganda has been peddling for many years, namely replacing the traditional Arabic concept of allegiance to a national leader, the king, with allegiance to the whole royal family, and there are thousands of them, whether they have any official position or not. Other appointed officials who are not family members, like, for example, the ministers of health or education, are not in the same top category. By treating royal family members like criminals and imprisoning them in the Ritz, Mohammed bin Salman has ended this idea that the whole family is somehow sacrosanct, and he has damaged its reputation, making public unrest more likely. Now I'm going to say a few words about Saudi foreign policy. The principal aim of Saudi foreign policy is to keep the regime in power. The established means of achieving this is through pleasing the kingdom's patron, the US. Over time, the regime has learned that the best way to please the US is to please Israel and the Zionist lobby, and relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel have never been better. The US-Saudi relationship involves security, politics, money, intelligence, and above all, oil. It is a relationship between the US as a country and the Saudis as a family. Nothing changes when a new administration enters the White House. The ordinary people of Saudi Arabia are never consulted or involved. Originally, the relationship was based on a deal: security for the Saudi regime in exchange for a reliable supply of oil to the US at an affordable price. It was symbiotic, although the US always held the upper hand. Since 9/11, the balance of power has changed, and now it is overwhelmingly in favor of the US. Today, the regime cares more about US public opinion than the opinion of its own people. It tries its best to meet US demands, and its PR machine portrays the regime as America's loyal servant and, like it or not, the best hope for governance. Every year, the regime spends hundreds of millions of dollars whitewashing its image in the US through public information campaigns and Washington lobbyists. Other Western governments and electorates are also targeted, but the US is the primary Saudi foreign policy concern. Saudi Arabia depends on the US for protection against every external and internal threat, including peaceful democratic challenges from the people. The US has never supported peaceful democratic opposition movements in Saudi Arabia. The lack of opportunities for peaceful political reform has led to violence, which has now been exported to us in the form of a massive wave of terrorism on the streets of the UK and in other European countries. On the US side of the relationship, the US highly values the Saudi regime because it is predictable and it is prepared to act against the national interest. It depends on the Saudi royal family to meet key foreign policy goals: control oil in the region, maintain a friendly regime in charge of the two holy mosques, and maintain the security of Israel. Though the relationship is strategically and economically important for both sides, it is a paradoxical alliance between the world's most open democracy and self-declared enforcer of global freedom, backed by a Christian majority, and one of the most repressive, secretive, and corrupt absolute dictatorships in the world, ostensibly observing a puritanical strain of Wahhabi Islam. As a result, both governments have come to learn that it is best if they conduct their affairs in deep secrecy. The details of their relationship are politically toxic to both of them. This is why business dealings between the two parties are kept secret, and US government files concerning Saudi Arabia are routinely kept secret for 50 years, some even longer. And when they are declassified, they are partially redacted, showing the extreme sensitivity of the material. Both sides avoid public criticism of one another. The US routinely turns a blind eye to gross human rights abuses by the Saudis, which in countries such as Iran or Sudan would certainly have resulted in strong US criticism, or worse. Only once have the Saudis acted against the US interest: in October 1973, when King Faisal joined an Arab oil embargo against the US, and in a matter of days, the global oil market was thrown into chaos, and Americans were waiting in long lines to buy petrol. Besides its relationship with the US, Saudi Arabia always supports monarchies and dictatorships and opposes the emergence of any other Islamic regime or any other kind of indigenous Arab political liberation movement or group. Pragmatic or temporary support for Islamic or Arab nationalist causes is possible, but there are no principled long-term commitments. If I have time, I will just say a few words about Saudi embassies. Most day-to-day business in Saudi embassies is serving the interests of the royal family, their personal and business needs, getting them visas, managing their assets, arranging professional services like lawyers and so on. But Saudi embassies also monitor foreign media for criticism of the regime. All media comments are collected, and any allegations are often addressed in Saudi-controlled media. The embassy will also not hesitate to take legal action. The influence of the Saudi lobby is second only to that of the Israelis. Every Saudi embassy also devotes considerable resources to monitoring Saudi nationals in the country. Saudi external intelligence tries to monitor all Saudis abroad, and it operates a large network of informers and spies. Embassies are also involved in the Saudi government program to kidnap dissidents and defectors living abroad. In the past few years, the Saudis have abducted at least 3 royal family defectors and taken them back to the kingdom against their will. In Switzerland, in 2003, after Prince Sultan bin Turki was drugged and violently kidnapped and taken back to Saudi Arabia on a special medevac plane, the Saudi ambassador in Switzerland and the embassy staff came to his hotel suite afterwards to gather up all his belongings and pay off his staff. That same year, the UK government expelled a Saudi diplomat after a court found he had corrupted a British policeman to use the UK National Police database to find out about Saudis living in the UK. One well-known Saudi dissident, Mohammed al-Masari, subsequently had to enter a witness protection program. Saudi embassies also monitor Muslim groups, sects, and mosques, and using their money and influence, the Saudis try to exert control over Muslim thought globally. I will stop there. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.